last event, we had a ton of problems with Dewit. Main issue we were fighting was just getting the carb stability remotely good. When I tried to give it any throttle, it would go super lean, like 18, 20 AFR, and just fall on its face. And the only way around that was to give it throttle, like 4,000 RPM, dump clutch, and just keep moving. It just would not idle. I would do the run, dump clutch, stay high RPM the entire run, be running it really hard, and it was happy. AFRs were on the lean side, about 14 and some change to 15 during the run. More lean than I would like to see. But then at the end of the run, or if it popped out of gear anywhere in run, it would just fall flat on its face, like super rich, flood the engine to the point AFRs would tank from 14, 15 all the way to 9 below readable. And I would have to crank the engine over with the throttle open to get as much air in there and try to get as much fuel out of the system before it would refire, and then it'd be back to the way it was prior to that, where it'd once again fall right on its face lean. So you'd go from fully flooded rich to back to lean, not wanting to run, and it was just super frustrating. I was all over the place with changing float levels, screwing around with different things, taking the carb apart, putting it back together, changing idle mixture screws, changing idle speed. Nothing I could do made any sense. I even mistakenly threw leaner jets in it, which I don't know what my thought process was there, other than maybe if I have less jet in it, it'll run a little leaner in the run, and when I let off throttle, it wouldn't go fat. It would be like rich but not fat, like overly rich, which made no sense because as with those leaner jets, it did the same exact thing. So fighting all over the place. And then on that last run, I had kind of a aha moment talking with my passenger of, I changed the fuel pump. And the fuel pump I went to is for like a CJ5, I want to say, because the Comanche was fuel injection from the very get-go. Never was carbureted. And wouldn't have been running a mechanical fuel pump. The engine has provisions for a mechanical fuel pump because the engine is an AMC engine and it had some carbureted variants. And I thought if I just threw that on there, it'd be all great because it's a factory fuel pump on the motor it was designed for. Not factoring in for a completely different carb, completely different application, different motor probably too, because it shares designs with the 4.2 liter straight six, I believe. I think the 2.5 and the 4.2 are similar in design. Anyway, long story short, I thought I had too much fuel pressure. So I went and did a bunch of modifications to Dewit to try to suss this out and look into it. And let's take a closer look at it. I'll bring you in, show you what I did, and talk over what I found. And I've done a bunch of work, so let's start covering it. All right, we're closer, and you probably can't see anything I've done to it. First of the modifications you can see down here. So that was the first thing I did before I did any work to it, trying to control fuel pressure. I just put a gauge on it and I said, let me make sure it has high fuel pressure because I don't know for sure. I just suspected it. And what I found was running the fuel pump as is with just this fuel pressure gauge in line, I was seeing upwards of 15 psi of fuel pressure. So it was pegging the gauge. That's supposed to be a low pressure fuel pump. It might be an EFI fuel pump for all I know. I don't think it is, but it was putting 15 psi idle, and that's max to the gauge. So it might have been putting more. So I obviously needed to regulate it. And what I ended up getting was just your bog standard Edelbrock fuel pressure regulator back there, mounted to the firewall, and I had to back it out a lot to get the fuel pressure down. Holly, for that carb, recommends, I want to say it's like 4 to 9 psi of fuel pressure. That's what it calls for. And so I just set it up for that, ran it, and drove it around. And in that short test drive, it wasn't falling on its face, but that was because I had the carb hat off and all the intake tubing off, so that way I could have a GoPro there on the hood looking directly down the bowl, and then I also had a GoPro on right there on the battery looking at that fuel pressure gauge. Unfortunately, the battery cable was kind of in the way of the reading. Couldn't see the exact reading, but it was about where I set it. You could tell by like where the back of the needle was. And what happened on that drive was it was still behaving, when I look back at the footage, exactly the same. You could see gasoline spraying all over the back of the firewall. You could see that getting wet every time I got off throttle. And I suspected what was happening. It was just the bowls were getting full. And then on decel, when the throttle blades would shut, it just would create this kind of Venturi effect, I guess, or what do you want to call it? But it was pulling gas directly out of the vent. And if the carb hat was on, all that would go down into the carb, cause it to go rich. But since the carb hat was off, I never saw it go rich because all that gas would just spray out all over the inside of the engine bay. And then I ran into my biggest mistake in setting all this material up. Was I set it all up, and I've never worked with fuel fittings that needed thread sealant. All of them have been, either barb fittings or stuff like that, AN, where it's self-sealing. You don't need to do anything to it. These are NPT threads, so they needed some semblance of sealant, or cranking them all the way down and hoping for the best. I hedged my bets and threw some Teflon on there, not knowing that Teflon tape is a bad idea. Not because Teflon can't handle fuel, which is my assumption was it's Teflon. It can handle fuel. My fuel lines are Teflon. Shouldn't matter. But what the issue is NPT threads are so tight because I think they're supposed to seal, but most of the time, at least in my experience, I've never had them seal good with fuel. That tight fitting of the threads really compresses the Teflon tape and shreds it into little pieces. And in my drive, those little pieces of Teflon found their way into the carb, blocking both main jets. And without both main jets, it went dead lean to the point where it was misfiring, super unhappy. And I was about a mile away from home when this happened. I sat there for a solid 45 minutes or so trying to figure out how to get it to run, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I was backing out the idle mixture screws to almost completely out of the carb. Nothing was doing anything because I didn't realize at the time that the main jets were clogged. And I eventually just limped it home in idle, super lean, using the accelerator pump to keep it alive, because the accelerator pump wasn't clogged, so I could just keep tapping the throttle barely enough to pump gas with the accelerator nozzle, but not enough to open the throttle blades, because then it would go even more lean. So yeah, that was fun. Redid it all with the proper liquid sealant, so that way we don't have those shreds anymore, and was a whole debacle. The other thing, big improvement I made was on some wiring. As you may remember from the beginning of last video, I really wanted to get a voltage regulator, or not a voltage regulator, ballast resistor. It took me a second, got there eventually. Ballast resistor on the power side of the coil, because the coil was getting super hot, like very, very hot, to the point where the old one exploded. And this one was doing the same thing without the ballast resistor in there. So what the ballast resistor does is reduce the amperage, if I recall correctly, going to this coil. And with it in there, it's still plenty strong enough to run the engine, no issues there. But it keeps this coil much colder because it's not getting all this excess voltage that it's not using, or electricity, or pixies, if you will, that it's essentially just putting into heat into the case. Along with that, I redid the wiring for the alternator and redid a bunch of work on the inside. So, sorry, lighting is not ideal at this time of night, but before, this big switch was the only switch for power in Clyde, or Dewit. So you turn on that switch and you had power to everything, ignition, all that. Now, as you can see, I got two switches. You got your main power, nothing happens. Now I have a ignition switch here, and now that turns on all of the electronics, as well as I have the alternator going to that switch, the ignition switch, and the indicator light is now inside the cab. So rather than previous, the way the alternator worked is I had an LED that went to the coil, and it essentially, the alternator would get signal for power by when the coil was excited by the ignition. And I didn't like having it hooked up to that. Technically is fine, but I just wanted to get everything off of the coil that didn't need to be on the coil. So now it's on the ignition switch, and I have the indicator light inside the cab, so now I can see if the charging system goes off when I'm driving. So if I throw the alternator belt again, which is, you know, likely with the way I drive and the way things go, I'll know because that charge indicator will come on. The other thing I did, along with wiring, is, if I can get over here, I wired up a little button over here, because one thing I noticed a lot during that last run, or last video when I was driving, and I've noticed it in a couple other times I was driving, I would be pointing out down cones that someone else had hit in front of me, trying to point at the corner worker saying, hey, I didn't hit that, because I don't have a horn. So I'm just like frantically pointing down in the cab. And then I'd end up taking out 2 or 3 cones because I was trying to point at this down cone instead of driving, and then defeating the purpose of me going, hey, I didn't hit that cone, but I just took out 3 other ones. So now I got a button here and a horn. You can probably see it right here. Just center mass, because I only wanted to wire up one. It's pretty loud for what it is, and it's right up front. So hopefully that'll do the job, and it's easy to move and relocate if need be. The last thing I wanted to cover, and I'm going to work on, depending on how things work out with timing, I may work on trying to do some more wiring. I would love to get headlights going and markers and all that, tail lights wired up, so that way if I ever want to do a nighttime rallycross because New York sometimes does them, and some places sometimes do nighttime rally crosses. Would love to do one of those one day. So, and eventually I would love to have lights on Dewit for doing rally sprints if they ever come back. So I may do some things with that. But the main thing I need to do before the next event, which I'm going to work on with you here, is I noticed this a little while ago, but these motor mounts, they are the factory motor mounts that I had Cone Dodger, when we first picked up the truck, put these in, because the truck, when I got it, was full race mode. They were solid metal mounts, which in circle track, perfect. You don't want the engine to move. You want all the power to be transmitted down the drive line. You don't want any flex. You just want instant throttle response. And it was deafening, and it is not good for rally because it will break everything. Everything will be vibrated to death. So I had some stock mounts I ordered. I had Cone fill them with window weld urethane, which is a kind of low buck hack to stiffen up factory mounts and make them more rigid, make them stiffer, more likely to live, and they're dead. They are completely shagged. So much so, if you pay close attention in that last Rallycross video, you'll see that it was popping out of gear multiple times. On my last run, I ended up actually getting an off track because it popped out of gear. So you could actually see in the driving video under the hood, you can see how much the motor was flexing, and those mounts are just shagged, just completely destroyed. So I went and I did what I should have did from the get-go, and I found some upgraded motor mounts. Let me go grab those. All right, and here are the new mounts. They are a slightly beefier construction, some heavy gauge, looks like 3/16 steel, and just your standard polyurethane bushing with a sleeve in it, and made by a small company, Brown Dog Off-Road, made in the USA. Kind of made to order stuff, which is nice. It was cool to find just, you know, someone making mounts for a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder, and they offer hardware kit, like new bolts, and don't let the silver fool you, they are high tensile strength bolts. I double checked because I was concerned when I saw that they were silver as well. And I hedged my bets as well with a new set of bushings for when I completely wear these out. These are probably going to be on the stiffer side. I'd probably like a little more give for what I'm doing with the Jeep. This may lead to having some issues because of how rigid these mounts will be comparative to what was on there with the stock ones. But they should last a little better, and they shouldn't rattle my teeth out with the give of the polyurethane compared to just steel mounts. So we're going to install these and see how they work out for me. And if all else fails, I can always buy new stock ones. But let's get a closer look at these. Nice that someone does work on these engines. There's nothing special about these. As you can see, they're just kind of, just almost looks pretty much like a axle bracket bent, and then a little sleeve and welded together, bolts welded in place to be the studs. Nothing special. I can make something like this, given enough time, but I'd rather just someone who has everything set up, jigs, can make it themselves, and I can save some effort. And also, when you buy something like this, it's someone who has done it multiple times and like some helpful stuff. They label driver's side, passenger side, install this side first, little stuff like that just makes the process go smoother and make your life easier. So I appreciate that kind of stuff and that attention to detail. And it's one of the things that I was kind of banking on with ordering this kit. There's some other companies that I found that make stuff, but this just seemed like helping a small company out and looked like a pretty good product. So let's get these installed and see how much more loud Dewit is. It hurts to think that we can make it louder, but we can, and we probably will. But eventually, realistically, it'll be good enough. Totally the same exact day that we were talking about what we were going to do. Totally didn't, have a completely new day start. Because I was too tired to work on things. Dewit is so low, I can't get the damn engine hoist underneath him. I guess if I gotta get him on the lift, I might as well undo the bottom of the motor mounts. This is probably a blessing in disguise because I was gonna get the engine on the hoist and then have to crawl underneath. Now, you see, I said to myself, this one's probably going to be a pain because if you think back a long time ago at the off season, these lower control arms sat higher. And this particular one bashed this bolt. Oh boy. Good thing that didn't fall on my lens. Should I have done this a lot earlier? Probably, yeah. Dry grit. Turning it an eighth of a turn at a time with the wrench and not just stepping up to a bigger socket like an intelligent person. Yeah. Am I glad if I thought of it when I did? Yeah. All right. Who stored this thing in the 2-ton setting? No one ever uses the 2-ton. Motor mounts don't look that terrible. Like, I expected it to be way more blown out than it is. It was getting late and I didn't realize the camera ran out of battery. Probably why I kept shutting off. But I got the mounts in, and that mount looks awfully sideways. But it's mounted. I just gotta tighten everything down, get it fired up, maybe look to take a test drive, see how it behaves, maybe get the GoPro in there and whatnot. But yeah. Let me finish getting this tightened and buttoned up. As tight as can be. As I was tightening the passenger side, it kind of sucked it down. I just never quite wanted to line up right. Trying driver's side was more straightforward, other than, you know, trying to get your hand on top to hold the bolt while you're removing the, or tightening the nut. But if you stand back and look straight at it, it seems kind of crooked, but drive shaft isn't at a real awkward angle. Alright, hello. Welcome to Friday, which is travel day to the next Rallycross event. This is the Southern West Virginia national tour. Event's about 7 hours away. But yeah, you join me in lovely West Virginia. Did the first leg of the trip already. Nothing special left at. A little after 9 a.m. and just been kind of cruising. Clyde's been doing great, but I figured now would be a good time to stop and talk over a little bit of what's going on with Clyde, because while I did work on Dewit, I also did a ton of work on Clyde after the Panthera event, and maybe I'll go over a little bit while we're sitting here and yeah, give you a little brief update. All right, first thing that you might be able to glimpse there on the top of the truck is I added solar power to the back of Clyde. So they're up just in that very top area. There is a solar panel feeding to this controller, which you can see right now is charging at 13.7. And yeah, it just feeds through the roof, comes down, and is charging that little 100 amp hour battery down there. Really nice system that kind of is pretty trick so far. Seems pretty good. I don't fully know how well it's going to work on this trip, especially I would like to get some more battery power. But yeah, other than that, inside hasn't changed all that much, other than I got a little outlet there and a power inverter over there. One of the other major things I did was to put new headlights in Clyde, which was a lot more wiring than I was expecting. And I don't know if I truly have high beams yet. I think I just have 2 sets of low beams, so that's something I'm probably going to have to look into and work on, because I'm fairly certain it is just two layers, 2 upper and lower layer of high beams. All right, the other main thing I worked on is underneath the truck, so let's get under there. So a little hard to see, but just underneath Clyde, just inside the door. And what you're looking at here is the fuel filler necks that are inside the bed area of Clyde. And you can see a lot of newness down here. I got some aluminum pipes for getting to the gas tanks and brand new rubbers. This was because on the way back home from Panthera, we lost both, or pretty much every hose clamp in that system broke, and I found out that those crossover pipes that you saw in aluminum here were made of PVC originally. And there was a sign that said, do not top fuel tanks off. I figured that was just because of the rubbers, but turns out, no, that was because they use PVC to get to the gas tank. So yeah, it was a thing. So now it is much better. Went to grab drinks from the cooler in the back, and yeah, this one that I kind of bodged further out hinge with a roller that I bodged a little while ago. Yeah, that drill bit fell out, and then the iron pipe fell, and I had to pull the wheel out. So yeah, we're just gonna pretend like we didn't see any of that and hit the road, right? Look how pretty this place is. Oh, these hills are hell on Clyde, but it's pretty. All right, made it to the event. Pretty uneventful drive. Clyde ate through 68 gallons of gasoline, somewhere around there. No, probably no more than that. 80 gallons of gasoline. Let's not think about that number. But made it. Had struggles in the last 100 and some odd miles, but overall, I'm happy I'm here. Gonna have a good time tomorrow and see how things go. I'll see you in the morning.
I was laughing.
Morning, time to head off to driver's meeting / grid. Let's hit the road. one, or session 1 of the day done, morning session. Currently going to be sitting in, looks like P5 maybe, P4, P5 out of 7 people. So doing all right. Oh, there's Josh from DC region, who was holding first, I think, and is still holding first. He found more time. Wow, he's killing it. 48 seconds. I was running 50, so he's doing good. So yeah, I'll see you in the afternoon session. Looks like we might get wet. Good thing the windshield wipers don't work. Your door leaks. I can't imagine why.
Oh, it's coming from here?
Yeah. The door seals are bad. It's fine. Everything's fine. not the situation I was expecting to be in, but round 2 of storms that destroyed the awning is rolling in, and so I quick pulled the arms off. I will take all those fasteners out tomorrow, so that way I can roll this whole thing up and put it inside, and hopefully maybe steal parts from the other side and make one functioning awning again. Thankfully nothing tore, and nothing ripped out there, so I should be able to fix it up enough. Dewit is a wreck. I am a wreck. Don't worry. I used those tires as a ladder to take everything apart, but I wore my safety vest the entire time, so I was safe. At least I get a show. And also nice that the wind direction is currently in the direction so I can keep this door open and not get soaking wet. There it is. I guess our show's over. All right, let's try with this camera. I don't think it's gonna be much better, but give it a shot. So yeah, we had a really good start to the day. I was running down fast times, and I was thinking, all right, maybe I can even be competitive and fight for a podium position. It looked feasible for me to fight for a podium position. And then we ate lunch after working course, and while lunch was just about to wrap up, we noticed dark clouds, and we all looked at the radar. The radar looked like it may clip us barely, and it didn't look like it was going to be that bad. Just some green bands. It was only supposed to be a little bit, and it looked like it would miss us. And then, so I threw everything in the truck just in case, but I had the awning strapped down, and I was like, it's strapped down, it should be good. If it's just going to clip us, I feel okay with that. And then I pulled over into grid, got ready to run, and that's when the storm just started coming towards us, and it was clear that it was going to hit us. So I started walking towards to put the awning down, and as I started walking, the wind started picking up a lot. So I ran, and I thought maybe I'd have enough time to quick put the awning up and put it away before the wind hit, and I didn't. I was fighting with it. I had some people try to help me. It was really nice of them to jump in and try to help me, but by the time we started doing it, the wind was already whipping, kind of like this, and it grabbed the one side and bent it. And once it bent that one side, we couldn't get it all the way up. We got it as up as we could, and then me and Mike, who runs the MR2 normally in the DC region. Jeez, it's just getting louder and louder. Mike, who runs in the DC region, was trying to help me put it away, and we gave up, jumped in the back of Clyde, and we weathered it out much like this. The wind was definitely worse during that little pop-up because it was shaking Clyde, like violently shaking Clyde. And it is eerie when you're in this box and you can't see out, and you're just pouring rain, it's loud, it's shaking the whole truck. The awning was smashing up against the side of Clyde and making a bunch of racket, and it was like, no joke, pretty frightening. Like, that was a range of emotions to be in. After that rainstorm, I then had to go to a soaking wet Dewit, and run in the rain, or after the rain. It was super muddy, as you probably could tell from the clips, the driving footage. It was bad, and as soon as it rained, I knew my chances of getting anything competitive was out the window. I managed to like wheel Dewit. I'm pretty proud of how I drove that last run as it was starting to dry out. I was starting to figure out how to find the dry line, and I was picking up a lot of time towards the end and keeping up with the other guys that didn't have the good mud tires. So I was able to drive pretty good, but overall I'm in 5th place with the possibility of fighting for like a 4th or a 3rd maybe. So podium still technically possible, but the person in 3rd right now is Josh, who was in 1st prior to the rain, but like me, he didn't have tires, so we'll see what the course is like after all this rain, because this is a lot of rain. I will say this area must be, it drains really well. I don't know what's up with the soil, but it drains super well. Towards my last run, it was starting to get pretty dry, like the course, which is shocking for how much rain we got. By the time the other run group finished, it was practically dry. Like there was barely a wet line. There was only a couple puddles on course that they had to deal with. They were pretty much driving a dry course practically. So pretty interesting. Maybe we'll be driving a slightly tacky course tomorrow, which would be cool. The solar system has been working and has worked out pretty well. I was able to run that fan over there all night long, and it was able to keep me cool. So that's a positive to look at, and we'll keep working on Clyde and Dewit and make the most of it. I will say I was having enough fun today driving Dewit that I was originally planning to call it after this event and then start doing the EFI conversion onto it. But I think I'm probably going to work towards maybe doing 1-2 more events, because now that I got Dewit running decently again, God, it's fun to drive that truck. It's so good when I can actually drive it. tried to make it less by shutting it off while running. It was not as bad. End of the day, ended up 5th, dead last. What are you gonna do? Had fun. That's all that matters. So, gonna hit the road and see how far I can make it tonight. No guarantees making it all the way because it's a long haul, and it is currently a little afternoon. So, wish me luck that it's a smooth ride home. I don't need any more issues with Clyde. Final stretch. About 100 and actually I think we're just under 100 miles left to go. And here we are broken down. I'm not entirely sure what was going on, other than maybe it's heat soaked, because there was no vital concerns. Like, I was sitting at 210 degrees on temp, oil pressure was 60 psi, and then all of a sudden it just was breaking up. Didn't want to take any throttle, and I couldn't get it to behave. It just would break up more and more, and then I got to the point where I couldn't give it any throttle, just idle. So I pulled over, and as soon as I pulled off the road, it just died. So I'm gonna let it cool down, Start it back up, see how it behaves. Once it's cooled down, if it does it again, I'll fill up the gas tank with the jugs I have and see, maybe it's not getting fuel, but it's been a long weekend. Not an easy weekend. The price to have fun with your 80s shit boxes. Gas supply, I pulled the hose to the carburetor off. Seems good, but it seems like I do have some water in the system. I don't know if that's enough in the little bit I was cranking it over to make a difference, but morning, still here, side of the road. Managed to get some really mediocre sleep thanks to my earplugs and the gentle rocking of tractor trailers passing me throughout the night. Did a little more troubleshooting last night into this morning. I confirmed that I had gas in the carb, and I also confirmed that the gas flow to the carb seems good by emptying it into a bottle. I checked the voltage to the coil when cranking, and for a very split second before the power probe fell out, it looked like it was making 12.5 volts, so I have power, good power to the ignition coil. So I'm leaning to it being a coil or distributor issue. More likely than not, it's the coil. So I think I'm gonna go try to find a way to get to a coil. Alright. Took the cap off just for the sake of it, and maybe it's not the coil. I don't know, that doesn't look good. And time, back home. Yeah, I've made it back home. To say that was an adventure would be the understatement of understatements. I joked with the guys from DC region that were there with me when I was just setting off from the venue, and I said, my GPS says it's going to take me 7 hours, and that's not going to happen. Boy, did it not happen. I think we're at like 26 hours since I set off from the venue, and we're just now home. So let me quick bring you in, and we'll talk about what I did exactly, because in the fury to just get it done and get back on the road, I didn't record anything. So I did a ton of troubleshooting between last night and today. I have those little clips of little videos I was doing with my cell phone testing it, because I obviously couldn't be in the cab and out here looking at it at the same time. Just was videoing that and talking back and forward with Cone and ZK, trying to figure out what my issue was. And I tried swapping the battery, locate the batteries to different sides. I tried this plug over here. Was loose. The wires didn't look like it was connected to anything related to the ignition, but it was loose, and it's possibly grounded through the metal bracket. So I said, meh, let me try that. I checked to make sure there's fuel in the carburetor. I pulled the fuel line off of the carburetor, cranked it over, had it put fuel into a bottle, checked that, looked all right. Pulled the distributor apart and the ignition leads apart, and checked to make sure that they were all good, and Everything looked all right. The ignition coil was getting 12.5 volts from what I could tell before my power probe fell out of it. And everything I could tell pointed to the ignition coil, but to hedge my bets, I ended up replacing the ignition coil, put a new cap on it, and put a new rotor as well. I just said, I'm in here, might as well replace it all. And thankfully, I had my parents drive these out to me because way it worked out and where I broke down, it would have taken me just as long to walk and get an Uber to a parts store than it would be for my parents to just drive and bring me parts. And then if it didn't work out, it would have been a backup plan that I could just get in the car with them and have my insurance company tow Clyde back. Because technically I get 100 miles towing. I've been trying not to test that because I'm pretty sure they're going to give me a hard time about, it being loaded and all of this. Although they do know it's a car hauler. I specifically pointed that out when I was getting insurance for it, and I sent them pictures so they know what Clyde is. So anyway, replaced all of that, and as soon as I hit the key, it started right up. So yeah, it started right up, was running good. I, with my parents, packed everything back up, got Clyde back together, hit the road, and I knew I needed fuel to make it all the way home. So I drove about 15 miles to a fuel station. I knew I had pretty good access. Made it there. There was no issues. Truck felt better. If anything, it was taking longer for it to get up to temp than it normally does. It wasn't getting as hot. And I had more throttle control than I normally do. Like progression, I could give it more or less throttle than I normally would. Normally it's like quarter, 50, full. That's pretty much what Clyde does. But it felt like I had more pedal travel, felt good, and I was feeling pretty confident. I pull off the ramp to get to the gas station, still fine. As soon as I start pulling out onto the road to make it to the gas station, spit, 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 spit. I was like playing with the throttle, trying to keep it alive, and then it died completely. And I pulled into the gas station dead, managed to once again manually stop all of this truck with manual brakes because I had no power assist. That was fun, once again. Got it stopped right at the gas station, filled it up with fuel, and then it was struggling to fire up. Just would not fire. It would crank, and then it would fire, and then it would stop. And it felt like it was just not getting fuel. I'd pump it a few more times with the accelerator, crank it, it would fire off, die. And just kept doing that, and then it just stopped cranking or stopped firing off. So I gave it a little bit, and I ended up pulling. Let me show you. I don't know if I can actually show you now that I think about it. Let's see if I can get an angle on this. Yeah. All right. So what's in focus and frame right there? That is a internal fuel filter for the Quadrajet carburetor. The fuel line plugs into that. There's a little paper element fuel filter there before it goes into the carburetor. So I pulled that apart, opened it up, checked the filter. Filter looked clear. There's a couple bits of debris on it, but it wasn't plugged, not even close to being plugged. So I put it back together, said to my dad, I was like, Mom, I'm just going to crank it, see what happens. Cranked it, it fired up, stayed running. I looked at my dad and said, cannonball it home and don't stop for anything? And he looks at me and goes, yeah, that sounds like a plan. So I cannonballed it home. It ran perfectly fine all the way home. The only issue I had was one section of uphill where people were being idiots and coming to a stop. I tried to give it full throttle and it pinged a little bit, but that's not unusual. Hot engine bay, trying to give it full throttle under a lot of load. So I just backed off the throttle a little bit and it ran fine and was happy to get up the hill at reduced throttle. And yeah, other than just the most infuriating 100-mile drive I've had in a long time, between just I was being super cautious and listening to Clyde, so I was just no music. What do the kids call it? I don't know. But just listening to Clyde, listening to what the engine's doing, listening to every sound this truck makes, which is a lot. Normally I drown that out with music because it just stresses you out. And then people were just driving like idiots. It was so bad today. I don't know if it's because it's a holiday weekend, but there was like people doing 35 on a highway without four ways, just driving 35. And then there's this guy was following a camper for a little while who must not have his hitch set up at all because he was all over the road, wiggling everywhere, scaring the hell out of me. He would be going 65, then slow down to 45 to try to get the trailer under control, and then rock it back to 65, 70 miles an hour. I'm like, dude, you're gonna crash. Oh, and then I was like trying to get around him, but every time he would slow down, he would get the trailer back under control and then romp on it. And I mean romp on it. And I'm trying to get around him in Clyde and I can't. It was so infuriating. Like everyone, it felt like was out to get me. That's it. That's what it felt like. So needless to say, I am beat. I did not sleep very well on the side of the road. I've just infuriated troubleshooting this issue, infuriated that I didn't have my parts that I needed, which I had at home. Just overall, what a weekend, man. So frustrating. What a like bipolar weekend, if anything. Utter brilliance in driving Dewit. Driving Dewit was incredible. Like I had so much fun at this event. And credit to the guy who set up the course and the guy running the event for making the setup the way it was. It was so much fun. I was throwing Dewit around full throttle on the afternoon course. I would just put the throttle down and keep it down, just full throttle the entire run. It was amazing. I would throw a little bit of braking in there to settle it down, but it was so good. And when I was leaving that event, I was leaving it with the mindset of I can probably do another couple events with Dewit carbureted and have a good time before I start the EFI swap. This drive home has changed my mind. I need to do the EFI swap and I need to get a bunch more work done on Clyde to make him more reliable. I cannot take being stranded on the side of the road and not have the parts to fix it. So I am going to continue to improve it and get better. It was like a huge success as far as all the things I did to Clyde were a huge success. I don't even think I talked about it. I replaced the airbags and all the airlines to like completely new setup. And it worked fantastically, flawlessly. The solar panel, flawless. Kept me cold, like fan on. Everything was flawless. It was all the things I didn't account for. So yeah, with that, I'd like to thank you for watching. I hope that this isn't getting too shaky because my camera is getting very heavy. So yeah, thank you. I hope you enjoyed. And it may be a little bit before my next adventure. This was a lot. This was a lot to take in one weekend. But don't be afraid to have adventures. It is frustrating, but it's memories. I will never forget this weekend. I can tell you that for sure. There was so many memories created this weekend and so many great times with all the guys from and everyone from the DC region. It was just a blast hanging out with everyone, drinking together. Just like I said, a bipolar weekend. One of the best, worst weekends I've ever had. So go out there, have adventures, stress yourself out, figure your way out of the eventual situations you put yourself into, and learn from it, get better, and experience life. This was a life experience. Don't know if I'd recommend it, but it was a life experience nonetheless. All right, take care.